I actually just realized I don't want to work.
I don't want to work either.
All right, well, let's go.
So welcome to another episode of Co-Founders. This is Alex Mont-ros, and we have my beautiful wife,
Lisa Mont-ros.
All righty. So today's topic is this interesting one because I think it really brings to light some good questions that somebody should be asking themselves if they're looking to go into business on their own. And that is, there was an episode, or it was an article and a video that was written by, or contribution by a guy named Carlos Gil out of the Entrepreneur magazine or site, right? And in his contribution, the title was called, "If you suck as an employee, you won't be more successful as an entrepreneur." So say that again. If you suck as an employee, you won't be more successful as an entrepreneur. So that's where we're going to lead in. So what do you think about that saying? What's your thought on that?
What is true?
Yeah, what's true?
No, that's what I'm saying. It seems pretty obvious.
Why?
Because I think a lot of people who, if you work as an employee, like I've worked with lots of people in my working career, and you always have those people that challenge authority, that for no reason whatsoever, by the way. They just challenge authority. They don't want to do things the way the boss says that they want to do them. They think they're smarter than everybody else, and so they want to go into business for themselves. But if you can't even follow rules at the place that you work, how are you going to set rules at a place that you're starting? And you always work for someone, whether that's a boss that is actually writing your paycheck,
yeah,
or yourself who may or may not be writing you a paycheck, or your clients. You work for somebody. You're accountable to somebody. If you're not accountable to somebody,
I think that's the big myth, that all of a sudden I'll go work on my own and I won't have nobody to tell me what to do. Well, your customers tell you what to do.
Well, they do, and you don't have anybody to give them to. You don't have management to call and say, hey, this customer's unhappy. You are. Yeah,
your customers are your boss, in essence, as an entrepreneur, or somebody that's running a business or whatever. It's interesting. I think you said, you in essence always have somebody to report to, but the other part of it if you can't be a good follower, you really can't be a good leader. I think a lot of people forget that. Like, everybody wants to be a leader, but nobody wants to be a follower, right? And that's a very interesting kind of way of looking at it. Like, if you can understand what it means to be a follower, you can also, one, you're probably going to be very well astute and observant of what a good leader or bad leader looks like, even though as a subordinate, you are still doing what you've been asked to do, and you're doing it with excellence in mind, so that when you become the leader, you have already set the example, you know what it is to be a follower, and then you can also lead with that in mind, right? But if you're a bad follower, and of course, if you're a bad follower and then you want to be a leader, you've established no kind of pathway to what a good follower would be under your leadership.
When you don't have any credibility.
And people forget that, and there's no credibility to that. How does it tie back to habits? Because I think that was one part of his discussion. This guy, Carlos Gil, he mentioned about habits. Like, how would habits play into you becoming how do habits come into the mix?
Well, I think habits in any part of our life lays the foundation for who we are and whether we're successful or not. Whatever success looks like to us, it's your habits. Mm-hmm. It's what you do on a day-to-day basis. So I think, you'd first have to define what makes a good employee, what makes a successful employee. I mean, and as a boss, which I hate calling myself that, but that's what it is. Like, it's
my boss.
You know why? It's from. Did you ever read the comic strip Dilbert, or even Office? What was Office Space? Or Office? Was it Office Space?
The movie.
Yeah, that was the name of it, right? The boss was like the guy. I'm gonna need you to come in on Saturday.
I'm also gonna need you to go ahead and come in on Sunday too.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what we have, this vision of a boss, and they made movies called Kill Your Boss or I Hate My Boss or whatever that movie is called. They made two of them. I think it was Jason Bateman.
Well, any movie Jason Bateman's in is pretty
It's good. But anyway, that's why I don't like being called a boss, because I feel like a boss is such a negative thing. But I mean, as somebody who leads our team, I will say a good employee to me is someone who shows up for work on time, shows up ready to work, consistently puts in the effort throughout the day. I don't know the right phrase I'm looking for, but I mean, it's constructively challenging the status quo, I guess I would say, is if anybody of our team came to me and said, or you, and said, hey, I know we do things this way. Have you thought about doing it this way? It may save us more time, or it may save something else. Like, I don't mind being challenged as long as it's being challenged for the overall good, as opposed to just being challenged to prove I'm wrong. So I think that to me is what makes a good employee. All of those qualities and those habits also would make a good entrepreneur. You show up on time. You challenge the status quo constructively.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, those same types of things. So I think habits play into that. Mm-hmm. And your habits define you. I mean, you and I have both been reading a ton of James Clear, and he's, now become a guru on habits, kind of unintentionally. He didn't set out to do that, but that's just sort of the way his writings went to. Yeah. But it's everything. If you have bad habits, you get bad results. If you have good habits, you get good results. That's ultimately what it boils down to. Same thing as an employee entrepreneur, right?
Yeah, no, I'm agreeing with
right?
you.
You're giving me weird looks.
Now you know what I'm talking about. Okay, good. All right. No, that I think that's something that gets overlooked a lot of times. There's people that want to go into business for themselves, right? And have good intention to do that. But when they look at what their day-to-day role is in whatever job they have, there's a big disconnect, because they go in there and they treat, the job like crap. In essence, they don't put in their effort. And again, I think there's a way to, it goes back to also integrity. Like, you got to have integrity in the sense of, when you've been given a job to do it with integrity. And because that same character attribute is going to carry over into the entrepreneurship world, which you're going to need that much more integrity, because now everything falls onto you. You don't have the outs like you do as an employee. Right. Of, hey, for example, I remember at my corporate job back in the day, if one department wasn't doing something, it was always easy to point a finger at one department versus another department versus another, and there was a lack of ownership, for what, for the outcome that was everybody was going after, because everybody can easily say, well, it was that person that provided me the pricing I needed. Well, that services is really killing us here, and we're not able to add more value to our clients, so therefore we lost the deal. Whatever the case was. As an entrepreneur, it all falls back onto you. You don't have really anybody. You can blame a customer, I guess, but that's probably not a good, that's not, there are good customers and there are bad customers. We all know that, but it's on you to define and to decide who to take on. If you took on a bad customer, it's on you.
Right.
It's really on you. It doesn't matter, the repercussions of that were a bad experience, a headache, all those things that a bad customer could potentially bring to the table, but it's ultimately still on you.
Well, and if something goes wrong and you work for someone else, you have an escalation point. You have, I'm going to call my manager in, or if you're in a restaurant, the kitchen messed up the order, we need to get it remade, whatever it may be, you can point a finger at somebody. When you are an entrepreneur and you own a company, if a customer comes to you and says something's wrong, you can't blame your team.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't be like, oh, well, so-and-so input that incorrectly, so blame them, you figure it out. No, it's you. And whatever your team does, you did.
Right.
If your team made an error, it's on you to fix it. You can't point a finger and nobody else can fix it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for people who struggle at a job, because for whatever reason, anything you struggle with at a job that you work as an employee at, escalate that times 10.
Oh yeah,
being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Because you don't get to clock out at 5 and go home.
Yeah.
And shut your phone off. Like, you're always on. So I mean, I know a couple people who have started businesses, but they haven't quite gotten off the ground because they only want to work Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And they're like, well, I just don't have time to put in on the weekends. Well, you own a business. You have to.
Yeah.
You have to.
Yeah. Like being an entrepreneur has become like a cool thing, right? In the sense of...
It's a fun tagline for your business card.
Yeah, it's a fun... that. But I also think that it's been romanticized to the point where people are not really counting the cost, getting into business potentially at the detriment of their families, at the detriment of a lot of things. And people forget that whether it's building your business from, we took a long time to get to where we're at. And we also did it very strategically where there was, funds coming in over here. We're building the business over here, but putting in the efforts when, let's say you do have a job and you do have the spirit of an entrepreneur in you and you know it and you have all the right habits to get there, but you're trying to make your way there, is defining and getting to the point where you're working on your business, building the habits after hours, because you do have to work on it after hours. And that's where I think, to your point, you just said that, like, there's people that want to still have this same kind of parameters of time frame for, hey, I work from 9 to 5, but they forget that the time it took to build the business is really beyond the 9 to 5. It's 6 to 12. It's 6 to 1 in the morning. It's earlier, 5 to X, right? 5 to 9 is when you're building the habits to then be able to launch on your own down the road. So, just really segmenting into the optimizer, kind of portion of this episode. So today you're currently an employee, and I've been there before where, in multiple times in my life where I was an employee, but at the same time I wanted to start not another career, but I had an idea and I wanted to launch it. So if you're an employee today and you doing a true assessment of yourself and you say, who am I right now for my employer? Am I really busting my ass? Am I doing everything they're asking me to do? Am I going above and beyond? And if you can answer yes and be honest with yourself, then that's the good first step to be able to transition and say, okay, I'm ready for what it takes now to become an entrepreneur or move on into making my idea, realizing my idea, which then means, am I also now willing to put the work in after my time off of work, my day job or night job, whatever the case is, wherever you're at? Am I willing to put the time in? If you say yes to that, then you're definitely on your way to becoming, leaving this, 9 to 5 or whatever the case is, and then going off and, starting your own thing. But counting the costs up front and really examining yourself. And two books that I highly recommend anybody that's looking to transition into becoming an entrepreneur. One is James Clear, Atomic Habits. Really will define and help you see where you're at from a very practical standpoint and actually help you define and set things in place to actually change habits. And the other one is Extreme Ownership. And that book is written by it's the Navy SEAL guys. I forgot their names, but anyhow, phenomenal book. Talks about what it really means to have extreme ownership, and they share their stories of the battlefield of, these guys were Navy SEALs and what it meant to have true leadership in really, really tough situations, but they transfer that same knowledge into the business world. So those two books, Atomic Habits and Extreme Ownership, are really good books to help understand and really get a baseline of where you're at and call you out in the sense of, if you don't feel like you have full ownership, for whatever, your situation is, maybe it's time to start taking more ownership. And two is, if you don't have the right habits developed today, how can you start changing those habits, those bad habits, and change them into good habits? Those two things are definitely a prerequisite to becoming an entrepreneur. What do you think?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think the important thing people need to keep in mind also is that when you are branching off to become an entrepreneur, everything you had to do as an employee, you still have to do as an entrepreneur. You don't get to give that up. You don't get full flexibility of your schedule. And you get a little bit more freedom in the sense of if you need to go to a dentist appointment at 10 o'clock in the morning, you don't have to check with your boss to take the time off, but you do have to make up that time later. So I think it's, you know, I mean, if you want to become an entrepreneur, if you want to start your own company, just be prepared to work.
Yeah.
And more than you would have even for your boss when you were an employee.
And I'd almost want to close with this too. It's like, it's not meant for everybody. Mm-hmm. And everybody needs to be okay with that. If you're on social media all the time, you're going to start to believe another story that's not real. In the story of, well, you know, everybody else is out there running a business. The truth is, nobody's telling you the good and the bad. They're only showing you the good. I've been reading recently, we're going through the whole Profit First book, right? And it's interesting. So, you know, he's a consultant that consults a lot of businesses. Again, the author's name escapes me, Mike Mikowskiewicz or something like that. I forgot. Anyhow, but he said something interesting. He's like, the more businesses I consulted, he's like, because it's always, you know, when anybody asks you, how's the business doing? Everybody's like, oh, it's doing great. We're growing. He's like, the more I consulted business, I realized like these businesses are literally one bad month away from bankruptcy because they're either over leveraged or, again, going down the path of, you know, what the book premise is, you know, not focusing on profit, but focusing on more of the aesthetics of what you look like on the outside versus what the truth is of the business going on the inside. So, within social media, you see a lot of that. You see all the good. You don't see if somebody were to dig into the books of any business at any given time, you know, 80%, 90% might be one bad month away from closing their doors. But they're never going to say that, of course, right? So it's not meant for everybody, and it's okay. And if, you know, I have really great friends of mine that are the job I just or the career I just transitioned out of, you know, he doesn't see himself being an entrepreneur, but he sees himself climbing the ladder up to that company I just left, all the way to becoming a, you know, GVP, group vice president, or beyond that, senior vice president within sales. And I actually think he'll do it. And guess what? It pays well. He's going to make millions of dollars
the
over
world
the course.
Needs that too.
And he's going to do very well for himself, and that's a good path to go down. So don't buy into all the crap that's on social media that says that, you know, entrepreneurship is the way to go, because it's really not meant for everybody. And it's even hard, you know, even when you are an entrepreneur, at times to be like, do I really want to keep doing this?
There are lots of days.
Yeah, lots of days. So with that in mind, keep all those things in mind as you're making that decision. And with that said, I'll let you go ahead and wrap us up.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us again, and we look forward to seeing you next time on Co-Founders. Why do you smile like that? Do you want me to take a picture? I want you to see what that looks like.
Oh yeah, get screenshots for sure. That's good. Usually it's Lisa's face at the end.
I know. I was waiting for that. That's what I was saying. Like,
nope, you did it for me.